I am here today, joined by one of my good friends and longtime colleagues here in San Diego, Catherine Mattice. And I'm sorry, Catherine, I know I get it wrong.
Mattice.
Mattice,
Mattice.
Mattice, all right, Mattice. Let me start again. All right, hold on. All right. I'm very excited for our guest today. This is someone I've known for quite a while here in San Diego, Catherine Mattice, who is the CEO and founder of Civility Partners, and as a global traveler, global speaker, multi-book author, and fresh back from her keynote speaking back in Copenhagen overseas. So welcome,
Yeah.
Catherine.
Thanks for having me. Good to
It's
see
great
you.
to Exactly right. So I was looking back at some of my notes from when we first had conversations way back when, and when we kind of first connected on LinkedIn. And it's been over 15 years, which just kind of floored me to realize it's been that long since I think we first met through ATD way back when.
We did back when it was ASTD, and I was just thinking we tend to come together apparently when there's some sort of downturn in the economy, because you came and spoke at ATD during the recession back in 2008, I think.
Yes, exactly. Right after I had launched my firm, actually, that was in '07. I launched my company, and I think I
Okay.
had just started getting into a little bit more entrepreneurial type of activity and speaking back in '08, '09. So it goes back a way. So it's good to have it come full circle.
Yeah, here we are. Made it through another
Exactly.
downturn.
Right, exactly. Here we are recording this in November, almost December of 2023. So we're all talking and thinking about next year and what's going to be in front of us in 2024. So we'll have a lot of great discussion points to touch on. But I want to jump in with talking about your business and kind of what you're doing these days. Obviously, you founded Civility Partners back in 2009, and
Mhm.
you've been, as I mentioned, writing books and speaking globally and developing your kind of train the trainer programs and LinkedIn webinars and all kinds of wonderful adjunct professor type roles out there too. So tell us a little bit, first of all, about Civility Partners and really kind of what the mission and goal of the organization is.
Sure. So, our vision is a world where every person and every organization feels like they're being treated with respect and civility. And our mission then is to partner with our clients to help them create an environment that where people feel good and feel like they're thriving. And that's super important to me. Just what we do for work is a big part of our self concept and self esteem. And we spend a lot of time there, so we need to feel good there. So that's what we're working on. And yeah, I've been doing a lot of stuff over the years.
To say the least. Yeah, that's an understatement without question.
Yeah. So we do, to talk about Civility Partners a little bit, we do organizational development consulting essentially. So we're doing workforce surveys. We're then working with leaders to dissect that data and create and implement a plan to address the data and improve the work environment. Of course, we do training programs and a variety of things. And then lastly, we specialize in leadership coaching for leaders accused of bullying. So we don't coach normal leaders.
Is there such a thing as a normal leader? I don't even know these days. Everybody's
No.
got their own style and approach to doing things, and it's yeah, it certainly is in a. I guess leadership and bullying perhaps can be in the eye of the beholder. Well, I'm sure we'll kind of get into that conversation.
For sure.
One of the things I like to start off with when we have a guest on the podcast, and as you know, this is all about leadership, right? It's called Leadership Happens for a reason, and I think a big part of what people expect or kind of assume about leaders is that everybody has a very direct path, and
Mhm.
everybody that is a leader today plan to be a leader early on in their career and was trying to find a way to get there and kind of follow a path. But as I've found in all the recruiting I've been doing for 26 years now, but also through all the different interviews and folks I've had on the podcast, is that leadership is a much more jagged, kind of pathway, if you will. I'm curious about how you got into being an entrepreneur, launching your own business, as well as being a leader, both for your own team, but now kind of that guide to leadership on a global basis.
Yep. So I started Civility Partners right out of graduate school. I was an internal HR professional. And my title was director of HR. I was working in a small business and found myself working with another director who was pretty frustrating to interact with. He was bullying, come to find out, because while I was in graduate school, I decided in my very first semester to write a paper about this thing happening at work. And ended up doing all of my graduate research on the topic of workplace bullying and resolving that problem and what causes an organization to have that type of behavior and how do you address that. And so my master's is in communication, essentially inside organizations. And so then I got out of graduate school and decided I was going to start this business around solving bullying and creating a positive environment. So it was I wanted to be a consultant. That's why I went to get my master's degree, but I didn't really know what that looked like. Figured I think I would just get a job at a consulting firm and tell organizations what to do, and it would be great. So yeah, what I found is at the time, workplace bullying or abusive conduct and even harassment wasn't really at the forefront of conversation. So I ended up becoming a leader and a disruptor in the world of HR and talking about um, how important it is to have a positive work environment and the kind of damage it causes when people don't feel like they're in a good work environment. So, fast forward all these years later, a lot of people are now talking about these things that I was talking about so long ago. So it's neat to be considered a thought leader in my space. And then in terms of having a team, that's only been fairly recently. For a long time, it was myself, and I was a solopreneur and teaching college while I was working on civility partners. And then eventually it got to a point where I didn't need to teach college anymore. I was just doing civility partners. And then just over time, kind of slowly built a team out of necessity because my messaging was getting through to people. Then I needed help and I was too busy. And so I kind of became a leader in civility partners out of necessity to have a work-life balance. So that's
Well,
my
you
very
proved my point
jagged
perfectly.
story. What's
Exactly. Yeah,
that?
like I said, that's exactly what I was talking about. I mean, you proved it perfectly, where it was a bit of a jagged, kind of a pathway, if you will, or journey to where you are today, and
Mhm.
probably maybe not where you expected to be. If you had, if you went back to talk to yourself 20 years ago, maybe you'd have a little different expectation. And to that point, one of the things that I find fascinating in the folks that I have on as guests on the show is, learning about things that people do today that they have developed as kind of the fabric of who they are as a leader that they do again and again and again. And then also talking about the flip side, things that they wish they could go back and maybe do over, whether it's showing up differently for an employee or a colleague, or handling maybe a workplace bullying or other type of situation as well. So I want to put those questions to you. What are the things, if what comes to mind for you, what are the things that you wish you could do over? If you can go back and do something again, what would you change up? What would be your do over?
I remember there was a time at the beginning of all of this where I was really messing up in giving reports to clients after doing, I'd interview people, for example, and then I was so out of grad school and data focused, and I'd create these giant reports. I remember one of my probably first 5 clients somewhere in there. I remember giving them this report, and the CFO, who was my contact, was kind of like, we can't do anything with this, and here I had worked so hard on it. And that happened to me a few times. So learning how to report to leadership and talk to them in a way that works for them and that there's a time and a place for that amount of detail. And ultimately developing a skill to kind of upsell, here's your report and here's what you need to do now, and I can do it for you. So those are some skills that have taken a long time to hone and wish. I mean, it's fine. I survived, but at the time, of course, I really regretted that. I remember at one point I had a list and I was like, here's all the clients that I failed, and what went wrong there, and trying to figure out, like, what did I do wrong that they didn't turn into what I wanted them to turn into. But that actually is the flip side of your question. For whatever reason, I don't know where it comes from, but I think I'm really great at kind of debriefing with myself, like, this was wrong and I got to do something different next time. And what is that? So really learning from mistakes or anything. Anytime something bad happens, I think I'm pretty good at learning from it and moving on.
Well, I'm impressed and glad to hear that you're talking about applying what I call self awareness, right? A
Mhm.
self awareness to yourself, And I would imagine that's probably has to be front and center when you're coaching these leaders on workplace bullying or creating a hostile work environment. If they don't have enough self-awareness to realize I got to change something, or
Mhm.
maybe it's the board or head of HR or the CEO or the founder of the company, somebody along the way has to have that self-awareness to realize that either they themselves are creating this environment or they're fostering it and allowing it to take place. So that
Mhm.
self-awareness, I would imagine, has to be a really big part of what you do.
It is, and I just had a sales call earlier today where with the leader who said something that a lot of leaders say when we do surveys. They actually had already done their own survey, and they're now looking to figure out what to do with all of that. But he was commenting how disappointed it was to, or just how disappointing it was for him to look at that data, and he's like, we're just trying so hard, we're doing all of these things. And and we get that a lot when we do a survey and we present that to leaders. It's like, what, we're trying so hard. And so yeah, some of it is not blaming them or anything, it's just self-awareness around how we got here, not because you're a bad leader. We missed something, and that's why you called an outsider. And same when I coach people who bully, they're lacking the knowledge, they don't understand the impact that they're having. And so it's kind of it's a harder process for them because it's very individual, it's not a company-wide survey. But yeah, to be able to look at that data and say, well, dang, that's how people see me, I need to make change.
When I think about leadership, in in the bygone days, right? So call it 30, 40 years ago, with the Jack Welches and the command and control type
Hmm.
leaders out there, many of which, most of which are male, right?
Hmm.
But that's what comes to mind for me. Do you find it's a generational thing? Is it people that are reverting back to that command and control, my way or the highway? That's what leads them down that negative pathway to eventually becoming a workplace bully?
I don't think that just the my way or the highway, command and control, that in and of itself is not bullying. And I think people respect that type of management style as long as they're being respected while that command and control is going on. It's when command and control turns into, you're an idiot, how dare you make that mistake, I'm shaming you in front of your colleagues, that type of stuff, that's when it becomes bullying. So I do think it's always been there. It's just more attention to these types of things are, I mean, I've seen it in the last 14 years. The amount of attention on how we treat people at work has exacerbated. That's the reason my company is still around,
And doing
and
well and
doing way
thriving.
better
Yeah,
than it was 14 years ago. But yeah, so it's not the command and control, it's how you go about it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
definitely. Yeah. Do you see any similarities or commonalities among generations? What comes to mind for me when I ask that question is about everybody talks about, some commiserate and some are plotting it, but the Gen Z approach, and even millennials, but even more so Gen Z, with the quote unquote lack of respect, as some people might say, in terms of
mhm.
hierarchy or org charts or putting their time in and just kind of cutting their teeth as we all did, right? I earned my stripes, I had to go through all this BS, and you did too, kind of thing. Whereas the Gen Z folks out there, and I have two kids of my own that are in Gen Z, so I know that very well.
Mhm.
They are the need and even kind of the expectation for transparency and the willingness to call somebody out and say, hey, this is not okay, or I don't feel healthy at work, or I don't feel supported. Do you find that younger generation is pushing up on the the older generations, if you will, that are in leadership positions to make change out there?
Yes. So if we think about younger generations, for one, they grew up in a world of instant feedback. So, instant feedback via Google only came to me probably right as I was getting out of college, if that. So that generation's grown up with, they want transparency. They're used to having it. They're used to having information pretty quickly. So any manager who's withholding information or delivering information in a way that's harmful, that's hard for them. And also, I'm sure you didn't either. Our generation didn't have bullying classes or courses. There wasn't any attention to that when we were in elementary school, versus the younger generation is growing up with hyper awareness around treating each other with respect and LGBTQ issues and being open and respectful of everyone. And there is some of that. However, it's hard to say that that's part of why we feel like bullying exists. We've always had bullies. People have always been hurt by them. The method that I'm trained in was developed by a woman who's been doing it for 30 years. So 30 years ago, she was still being asked to coach bullies. So yeah, that certainly influences things in a lot of ways, but I wouldn't say, kind of that's the reason people are being called bullies now.
So it's always been around, but perhaps it's a little bit more visible, and
Mhm.
people are willing to call it out more often than they were years ago, which is a good thing, a very very good thing in my opinion. And I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much research out there. I'm sure you can speak to it more than I can through your own data, but also just in general that more productive or companies are more productive and workforces are more productive if they have that psychological safety and they feel
Mhm.
that they're respected and appreciated and acknowledged at work, as opposed to being bullied. That's got to those go hand in hand.
100%. There's so much research that when we feel good at work and psychologically safe, we learn more, we innovate more, we stand up against the status quo, we question more, we care more about the company, we care more about our work, we're more engaged. And on the flip side, when we don't feel psychologically safe, and even bullying can be a form of abuse. So there's lots of research about the damage being bullied can cause, even PTSD, which I always like to put that out there, that it's pretty alarming if you think about it, that you could go to war or work and develop the same type of symptomology. That's pretty astounding. So yeah, the research is so clear that when we feel good, we do good. When we feel bad, we do bad.
That's pretty straightforward. There's no there's no
Yeah.
way
Plus, it's
around
common
that.
sense. You don't need
It is.
research.
It makes perfect sense. Exactly. Yeah, I agree completely. Well, as a reminder to our audience out there, I'm joined today by Catherine Mattice, who is here in San Diego along with me. She's the CEO and founder of Civility Partners. We're talking about workplace bullies and how to get around it. More importantly, really how to educate people to make them realize, help them realize that they are not showing up the way they intend to, and to create a better better environment for their staff or their employees. One of the terms that kind of jumped out at me as I was doing some research to look into your background, as we talked offline as well, is this phrase that you use of being an upstander versus a bystander. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of what you're talking about, that safety, that comfort level, that willingness to push back and be more innovative and disruptive, comes from that. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to be an upstander in a workplace?
Yep. So a lot of us go to work and maybe we witness some inappropriate sarcasm or a microaggression or an inappropriate joke, and we don't say anything about it because it wasn't aimed at us or everybody else is laughing. So we're not going to step in, or we laugh too because we don't even notice. There's a lot of reasons that we don't speak up in those moments. So being an upstander is being an upstander in those moments and taking a role in that scenario. So if you hear it and you kind of consciously decide, I'm not going to say anything, you're not a bystander. That makes it sound like a passive thing happening. But if you're walking away from the break room like, ooh, Ken, that joke wasn't appropriate, um, that's a conscious choice not to say, Ken, maybe don't make that kind of a joke, whether there in the moment or later. So being an upstander is, opposite of bystander. And in fact, instead of the word bystander, I like to use the word reinforcer. So if you're constantly making inappropriate jokes and I'm never saying anything to you about it, then I'm telling you I don't care. It doesn't bother me. And that's a reinforcer. It's not a bystander, right? So
Sure.
your silence is
Yeah.
loud and clear.
Right, exactly. Back to kind of fostering and allowing that kind of environment to even exist. Maybe you're
Mhm.
not the one doing the bullying, but you're allowing it. You're encouraging it with your silence, as you said.
Exactly. So that's a big part of what we do is helping. Yeah, there's the really bad actors and they need coaching and help. And the organization certainly needs to do a lot on their end to make sure it's facilitating civil and positive work environment. But each individual in the organization needs to take some control and recognize they have a role in the culture.
When you're beginning to do this, let's say it's a one-on-one session, or sessions, probably more than one, with folks that are in this bullying mode. When there's always this kind of this stigma around executive coaching. People say, "Oh,
Mhm.
I don't need a coach. That means there's something wrong with me," right? When the
Mhm.
reality is the best athletes, the best astronauts, whether it's CEOs. I mean, you name the profession, the most elite group has an executive coach. But
Mhm.
when it comes to the kind of coaching that you're doing, you're
Mhm.
walking into that environment, that situation, that scenario, and there's already some, I mean, maybe this is the wrong term to use, but accusations. There's already something that's not working. And
Mhm.
the person that you're coaching may or may not be aware of it. It must be a very delicate, kind of balance that you have to maintain to not be accusatory, but also not beat around the bush and avoid the topic at hand. How do you work through that? How do you maintain that balance?
Yep. So people who engage in bullying behavior, I like to say they're kind of my delicate little flowers. They're consider a dog backed into a corner. It's going to bite you if it feels backed into a corner, and that's kind of the world that these individuals live in. And what's backing them into a corner is constant anxiety around competence and success, not only theirs but the organization. So ironically, often this behavior is coming from a place of, we can't fail, everybody get it together, what's wrong with you, you're making mistakes. So the intention is correct, how they're doing it is not correct. And so I'm not in there to accuse them or tell them they've done something wrong. It's very just like, look, I don't know what's going on, I don't know you, I don't work here, I'm not going to take HR's word for it. Why don't I interview people? So they give me the names of people to interview. And then I read that feedback to them. So I take all the interview notes, move it all into themes. That's a hard conversation. But the way I deliver that feedback isn't like, people think you're horrible. It's like, I'm here to make safe space for you. This is hard. And then I think after a few sessions, they really recognize that I'm not accusatory. I don't think they're a villain. I actually care very much about them. And I want to help them be better. And so I'm earn their trust, and then am able to help them make changes. And I'm not there to be a therapist or teach them even emotional intelligence, because they don't care about emotions. If they did, they wouldn't do that. So it's really very tangible, just like people say that you're shaming them in public. Let's talk about that. What are you doing that's giving people that impression of you? And of course, a lot of times at the beginning, it's, I don't do that. I've never done that. I know that Sandy said that and she's an idiot, that kind of stuff. But through the process, I help them recognize, well, you're doing something, and what do you need to change? So that's how but I often kind of become friends with these people at the end. I'm like sad to see them go. They often tell me they've been really appreciative of working with me. So.
Yeah, I was curious about whether, I mean, you obviously have some degree of closure once the coaching training is complete. Do
Mhm.
you have follow-on sessions down the road to check back in and see how they're doing, either with the folks that you coached or with their executive team?
So during the coaching process, I do interviews at the beginning and interviews at the end. So I do get that closure there in the kind of that whole process, which is about a 6-month process. Um, Part of my coaching also includes coaching this person's leader, which is often the CEO, or someone close to it. And so, obviously this person's acting that way because they've been allowed to. So the person managing them needs help also. So I'm leaving the manager with more skills to manage the behavior. I've got them talking more freely about the bullying behavior so that it's not so taboo when I'm not around. And so do I go back 2 years later? No. I mean, I probably should. It might be good to go back and see where everybody's at. But I do get a lot of feedback kind of randomly. For example, we have a new coaching client where HR emailed and said, Greg's been doing really great, really appreciative of everything you did. And I had coached him, a couple years ago. And she was like, I'm on a plane to go tell somebody else they need to get coaching with you. It's like, okay, a heads up would have been good, but that's nice.
Exactly.
Um, or another, it was, I mean, I felt good, but also
For
a
sure,
heads up.
yeah, it's a good testament to the work that you're doing, and, oh, by the
Yeah.
way, get ready for more work.
Yeah. Another example is a woman I coached. After about a year, she came back around and she said, "My team says I've gotten off the bandwagon and I need help." And so, the fact that her team felt comfortable to tell her, "You need to call Catherine," is pretty awesome. Means
That's
that
great.
even though she'd fallen off the bandwagon, she still had their trust. So, yeah.
Well, I would imagine, again, getting back to the topic of leaders and leadership specifically, that it's got to be tough also as a leader, a CEO, or whoever it might be in the organization that's running a team to say, yes, I have this person that probably they chose to hire, right?
Hmm.
And at some point, something went off the rails or something that they didn't see in the interview process, or for whatever reason may have developed, down the road. That leader, again, has to have their own self awareness to say, you know what, I at some point I have to have some culpability here. I have to take accountability as well. I need to bring Catherine in to help us with this. That must
Yep.
also be an interesting dynamic to talk to those leaders to get them to realize that they have at least a little bit of a hand in this.
They have a big hand in it. They've been not only allowing it with silence, they've been promoting this person and giving them rewards. And, these people are super competent because they're so anxious about it. And so they're often very valuable to the organization. And I get that. And that's why the organization's willing to help them with some coaching. But yeah, they not only have they been allowing it, they've been cheerleading it and being an ally, and HR has been
Right.
saying, you need to address that behavior. And CEOs going, don't you dare. They're valuable. So they're an ally. They're an upstand. The CEO is an upstander for the person engaging in the bullying.
Right, right. One of the things that you had said to me when we had our prep call a month or so back, you had this phrase that you said that there's got to be a consequence, right, for bullying. And I
Hmm.
was that made me think about, whether or not, I mean, to your point from a moment ago, if it's allowed to continue to happen and there's no recourse, there's no issues until people start to leave the company in droves, and then
Hmm.
maybe someone will realize, hey, you know what, maybe something's going on here. But at the same time, I'm curious about how you help or how you've seen leaders incorporate consequence into the work that you're doing and to improving and getting rid of these bullies, not getting rid of, I guess, getting rid of the bullying activity, I should
Yes,
say,
the
not getting rid of the
bullying
bullies. Yeah,
behavior. Yes.
the bullying behavior. Yes. Yeah, how does
Yeah,
how does
so
that
I
play
don't
out?
I don't take on a client unless there's a consequence in place, and that's because, as we were saying, that they've been getting rewarded. So as far as this person knows, their behavior is just fine, and they're in a little bit of shock when they're being asked to get into coaching. And so I coach the boss, generally the CEO, to have this conversation of like, look, this has gone on too long. Some lines have finally been crossed. Whatever happened, there's a catalyst to that's telling me you can't be this way anymore. And so I'm serious because I have been supporting you in this behavior. I'm putting a consequence in place. But I don't want to have to implement that. I want you here. And so I have found you a coach who will help ensure we're not doing that consequence. And so I'm sort of presented as a gift, of like, the consequence is there and it's not going to go away, but I don't want to have to implement that. And the consequence could be anything from, you'll be let go, which is often the consequence, to I coached a doctor who was going to be removed from a committee at the hospital she worked at, which was good for her career to be on that committee. So there, that was hitting her where it hurt a little bit. I've had salespeople be kind of threatened. You'll be moved to the really poor performing sales team where you won't make money. To I did coach a foreman at a construction company, which is rare. Normally, that's not who I'm coaching, but he had been there for 25 years and was a big part of the business. And he had this tricked out company truck, and they told me the consequence would be they would take that truck from him and give it to somebody else. And
Oh,
so
wow.
that was, yeah. So it has to be something that hurts a little bit, in order
Right.
for that. And the consequence is really about the messaging of, again, you just can't do this anymore. And so I have to put a consequence so I'm serious about it. But and also it gets that into the motivation to engage with me. But then once I give the feedback to them and I give them that super self-awareness of how they're perceived, they're often like, okay, you got to help me. I don't want to be seen like this.
Exactly right. Help me get past this. Right, right. I want to
Yeah.
have that ultimate consequence play out for sure. So,
Yeah.
one thing that comes to mind for me as you're talking and just reading about you, but also just our relationship over the last 15 years, is that you've got to be a pretty optimistic person, right, and believe that people can actually change to be in the business that you're in, right? Because you
100%.
yeah, I mean, you really have to have that at kind of your core to say, I'm going into the situation where there is that self awareness. There's an issue at hand for sure, but I'm going into this with the attitude that this person can change. I have to believe that to even do what I'm doing. Where does that optimism, that belief come from? I think your dad was an attorney, right, and your mom was
Mhm.
a nurse, if
A
I remember
nurse.
correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did they instill that in you? Did you have, examples growing up of people that were just resilient and optimistic, kind of beyond belief?
I honestly don't know where it comes from, but I get that comment a lot just from people I know. I was in a pretty crazy accident and people would come and visit me like, "How are you smiling and so positive right now?" I'm pretty sure I would not be like that. So I honestly don't know. It's in my DNA. And I do have like just unbelievable optimism and faith that people can change. And sometimes it hurts me in my personal life because I give maybe too many chances. I'm working on boundaries, Ken, with my therapist. But in coaching, I do, I'm a professional, so I can't give people all those chances in coaching. Sometimes it's just very clear that they're not interested in changing, and I'm not interested in being there to try to force it. So I've let a handful of clients go just to say it's clear this doesn't matter to you and you're not interested in change. So good
Interesting.
luck.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Well, I would imagine that's where your own kind of personal value system and professional value system comes into play. You've got to be really clear on what you're willing to compromise or bend on a little bit here and there for the right
Mhm.
situation. And those areas where you think, this is steadfast. This is who I am. This is the core of who I am. And I'm not going to adjust that for anybody out there. But I would imagine that would then lead into a discussion with your clients about their value system, either as an
Mhm.
individual or as an organization as well. Is that safe to say?
Um, Sometimes, I mean, the conversations go all sorts of different ways. I
Hmm.
know one core value for these people is they want to be seen as excellent by everybody. And so giving them that feedback, it essentially says people think you're really great at your job, but you're not a good leader because you're harming the people around you. And so for them, being competent is a number one core value. And what I found is where that comes from is they all have stories around kind of fighting for competence over the course of their lives, and so it's just something they've picked up. And so part of my job is just like, you're okay, you're the VP of some multi-billion dollar company with thousands of people reporting to you. You're good. People think you're competent. So some of it's just kind of helping them relax on the anxiety around the mistakes and helping them see, instead of shaming people, you could be teaching them and leave. So we do talk about legacy sometimes. What legacy do you want to leave behind? Is it you got stuff done, but everybody hates you and is happy to see you go, or that you got stuff done and everybody really enjoyed working with you? So yeah, I mean, yeah, there is a little bit of kind of what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Well, and to your point, really understanding that at the core of just about every leader, it's wanting to be seen as excellent. Like you said,
Mhm.
very few leaders are mediocre. I mean, there are certainly some, but usually if you're continuing to build your career and move up, whether it's a larger team, bigger company, whatever it might be, whatever is important to you, that label, if you will, or that image of being excellent or being a cut above is really important. And if you're doing
Mhm.
something knowingly or unknowingly that's compromising that or diminishing that excellence, then you're sure as hell going to want to change it, you would think.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want people going, yeah, they brought in $1 million in sales and also everybody hates them. You don't want, so that's some of what I talk about too. Like, yeah, how do you want people to talk about you? Do you want them to say they did really well, period? Or you want them to say they did well, but also, and I have a fun exercise that I use with my clients, and it's good for all of us who are humans. One of the very basic models I talk about in coaching is fight or flight. When we're fleeing or fighting, it's out of anxiety, which I use that word to describe all sorts of things. So it's a defense mechanism. And I always challenge my clients in order to help them build some awareness of other people and themselves. When you ask questions in a meeting and nobody says anything, is that fight or flight? It's flight. Okay, that means they're anxious. What are they anxious about? I might shame them or make fun of them or call them stupid. Okay, so if your goal is to get people to talk in these meetings, then you have to adjust your behavior by alleviating that anxiety. And then turning it on the client too. When you say you're stupid to somebody, are you fighting or fleeing? Well, that's fighting. What are you anxious about? So helping them recognize that you're no different than them. You're also functioning in hyper anxiety around competence. And that's what that feedback helps show. So to like take it down a couple notches, buddy. You might be successful, but you're living in the same state that everybody else is. And so here's my homework assignment. If we all go home after this podcast, I almost said training, and just start looking at behavior through the lens of fight or flight, you will find that almost 100% of our behavior is a result of defending ourselves, fight or flight. So take this podcast, for example. You and I are both in fight mode, not in a bad way. We're not arguing with people, but I would guess that both of us are, adrenaline's on a little bit higher than if we're at home in bed scrolling through our phones. We want this to be good. We want people to like it. So we're all doing this. It's just that people who bully are doing it to the extreme. They want something to be good and they're beating people up over it. Whereas we want this podcast to be good, and the way we're fighting is, normal. I like that word,
sure.
apparently.
Yeah.
So I would challenge all leaders just to pay attention to the fight or flight, and you'll see pretty quickly how the people function in that. And that means you have to help alleviate the anxiety that they're feeling.
For other leaders that are maybe starting to see some of this in themselves, or maybe they're not sure, and maybe they think they have that level of competence and excellence that we all talked about, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's something missing. Are there other cues that leaders should pay attention to? That example of being in a meeting and whether or not people actually talk and speak up when asked to offer questions, whether they do it or not. Are there any other scenarios that you see commonly play out that's at least a micro cue, if not a full blown cue, that something's off?
Um, yeah, I mean, back to my method is all around fight or flight. So all it takes is those two observations, and you can see easily that people do it regularly all throughout the workday. And so then the question you have to ask yourself is, or when you notice the fight or the flight, you have to say, well, that's a sign they're anxious because they're in defense mode, which is instinctual reaction to our anxiety. So if you see fight or flight, then you ask yourself, well, what are they anxious about? And then you can correct your behavior accordingly. And that's my very expensive coaching in a nutshell. So nobody needs coaching from Catherine.
No, quite the opposite. Now we know why we do need you, because even this short little conversation is already some key nuggets that we can pull
Yeah.
out. So
I guess I
I
could give
can
you some examples of fight or flight. So people, going like this with your body language, where you're looking down and your arms across, that's flight. Not speaking is flight. Walking away from something, that's flight. So it doesn't have to be like I'm running away. It's just, not speaking, looking down. These are all examples of fleeing. And then fighting could be anything from aggressive fighting and yelling to engaging in a little bit of conflict, or a conversation in a meeting, where you're like, well, no, that's not what I think. Here's what I think we should do. Those are types of examples of fight. And so then you go, what are you anxious about? And how can I alleviate that for you? And if you can the world's hard. So if you could be a leader that people take comfort in because they don't feel anxious around you, they'll be loyal for life.
That's so true. And I mean, as a recruiter and having brought people into companies that are needing, retooling, if you will, or talking to candidates and executives that say, "Hey, I love this company when I joined them, but it's just the culture has changed, or something is amiss, or I have a new leader, what have you." You see it all the time, and we have this expression that's,
Sorry, We need to edit this out.
That's okay.
Went down the wrong tube.
That's
Okay,
okay. Are
sorry.
you
You were
okay?
on a good roll too.
No problem. Um, we have this expression in recruiting that is all about, how people join companies and they leave managers, which is
Hmm.
so true. It's been true for me in my career. It's probably been true for you as well. And it's just so true. And so, one of the ways that it's one of the reasons someone leaves a bad leader is because they're being a bully and they're just
Right.
not, they're not cultivating a positive workplace by any stretch. That's a bad place to be for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks to the internet, people can go somewhere else so easily. I
Right.
mean,
And
yeah,
they can also post the fact that it's a bad
correct.
environment, and they're more than happy to do it. Right? Look at Glassdoor or Vault or other places out there. It doesn't stay within those four walls any longer. That's for sure.
Nope, they can tweet about it. They can, yeah, shout it from the rooftops. So
Yes,
it's
exactly.
important.
I have one more question for you, but before we ask that last question and wrap things up, how can people find you, get a hold of you? Like we were joking a minute ago, there's so many great little nuggets that you've already given us. But if someone wants to find out more about you and your practice and civility partners, what's the best way to find you?
I mean, send me a carrier pigeon or a fax. No, I'm just kidding. Catherine Mattice, just Google me. I'm all over the internet. I'm on LinkedIn. Civility Partners with an S is our website. Yeah, I'm everywhere. If you want to email me at info@civilitypartners.com, I was happy to chat with people. My website's got a ton of really great resources if you're looking for information around just building a positive environment as a leader. We got lots of good nuggets for you. So I would go to the website and you can download like a bundle of resources with, an assessment. Is your team feeling psychologically safe? Some self-assessments, worksheets, and all kinds of good stuff. So
And are your books available on your website too? I assume they probably are.
they are, and Amazon. So
Okay, sure. Amazon. Of course, everything's on Amazon no matter what you need.
yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so last question. And this is something that I've kind of come up with this term over the last few years because so much has changed in my own business and recruiting and being a small business owner it's a term that I call radical realizations. Things
Hmm.
that have kind of hit me almost with like a ton of bricks. Things I didn't realize that I didn't know. There's a lot of them, but there's some things that I thought I knew, which turns out I didn't. But also things that I didn't realize I'd have to contend with as a small business owner. I'm curious for you
Hmm.
in your business, and obviously there's so much that you're exposed to with all the leaders that you're coaching, but any radical realizations that have kind of that have come to fruition for you over the last several years, or as your business has really picked up and gained steam?
Oh yes, oh yes. This year has actually been our big year of, we're calling it Civility Partners 2.0, because although I've been in business for 14 years, there's been a lot of solopreneurship for quite a while, and then bringing on a team, and then COVID happened and like letting them go. And anyway, long story short, this year some things happened earlier this year that really highlighted how unable we are to scale. We were never going to scale to what I'm trying to get to, doing things the way we were. And the only way I was apparently going to figure that out is by getting some slaps in the face by some incidents and things that happened. And it's so funny, I have a business coach, of course, and she's been telling me things for a while, and it's like you can't hear it until it resonates with you.
Until there's that
So
that
we had
consequence that you talked about.
yeah, the consequence. There were some consequences and things happened. So, I mean, in short, a client actually fired us. We weren't able to service them because we weren't set up to, and I think it just needed to happen. So again, back to my thing of like, okay, lesson learned. I'm not going to fret over it. We learned some stuff from that, and we have spent the year really systematizing everything in the organization. So it's been a year of really growing here. So that's my lesson learned. You can systematize all the things that you think you can't systematize. It's totally possible.
I agree. I agree. I see that play out time and time again as well. And some things that are over systematized at times, but it needs to be
Yes.
a balance for sure. Where you gotta allow for some spontaneity and kind of fluidity in the situation too. But you're right. You can really create processes around just about everything.
Yeah. My
Yep.
joke is we're going to get to a point where we get to say, well, that's not my job, or that's not our process. Not that we actually would say that, but like, you call AT&T and they're like, well,
Right.
that's not my department. We have a process for that, and it starts over there and that other
Right, right. Not with me, exactly. I love that.
Yeah, so we actually would not say that. But my other joke is we know our system's working well if we don't actually have to speak to each other. Again, not the actual goal, but
Right, right, sure.
yeah,
But
gives us.
it can be sustainable and it can function effectively even without that face-to-face communication. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's great.
So that's my
Wonderful.
my big lessons learned this year. Yeah, I'm really proud of us.
You should be. You have a lot to tout as far as your successes, and congrats on all the work that you've done and the clients that you've had and the speaking engagements around the world. That's a lot of fun. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing. We've learned. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners have as well. But I'm sure you'll probably hear some from some folks as well afterwards that I'll reach out and ask you some questions about either their own or their leaders' behavior as well. So thank you for sharing
Please
that.
do. We do have an assessment. Am I a workplace bully? So if you're concerned, take that assessment and it'll give you some idea.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Catherine. It's been great talking to you as always.
You too. Thank you.